I stood frozen as my stepmother Diane locked eyes with me across our dining table. My fork stopped midair, food forgotten. The words hung in the silence like poison. "He's always been useless," she announced, gesturing toward me, as if I were an unwanted piece of furniture. "We should just take his room for the girls." Her daughters, Kimberly and Audrey, nodded enthusiastically, eyeing the last piece of my privacy. I stayed silent, swallowing both food and humiliation, while my father studied his plate. They had no idea what I'd been building in silence. Before I tell you how they ended up sobbing on the curb, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a like if you've ever felt invisible in your own home. Family dynamics in our house shifted dramatically 3 years ago when my dad remarried. Mom had passed away when I was 14, and for 4 years it was just Dad and me figuring things out together. Then Diane swept into our lives with her designer clothes and her 2 daughters, Kimberly and Audrey. Dad was instantly captivated by her confidence and polished something so different from our quiet household. Dad worked 60 hours a week running his construction business, which meant Diane quickly took control of our home. Within months, the warm colors my mother had painted, the walls were replaced with cold grays and whites. Family photos where Mom smiled disappeared, replaced by professional portraits of our new blended family, where I always seemed to be standing slightly apart. The first time I realized what was happening was when I came home from college classes to find my mother's antique coffee table gone, replaced by something sleek and modern. When I asked about it, Diane simply said, it didn't fit our aesthetic anymore. The way she said "our" made it clear whose house this had become. Kimberly, 19, and attending community college, took over the guest room that had once been my study space. Audrey, 17, and still in high school, claimed the basement rec room as her creative studio. Both girls mirrored their mother's attitude toward me, treating me like an unwelcome houseguest, rather than someone who had lived there his entire life. Dad noticed none of this. Or, if he did, he chose peace over confrontation. Our once close relationship dwindled to brief conversations about practical matters. The light in his eyes when he looked at Diane told me he had found happiness again, and I couldn't bring myself to challenge that, even as I felt increasingly erased. During family gatherings, I became a ghost in my own home. Diane would introduce her daughters proudly to guests while I served drinks or handled the grill, rarely acknowledged except when a task needed doing. I learned to make myself useful in the background, hoping that service might translate to acceptance. It never did. The house that once held my childhood memories became foreign territory where I carefully navigated someone else's rules. The only space that remained truly mine was my bedroom, the last bastion of privacy where I could still feel connected to my past. My bedroom was small by most standards, tucked at the end of the upstairs hallway. The walls still wore the navy blue paint my mom had helped me choose when I turned 12. Posters of tech innovators and entrepreneurs hung where basketball stars had once been. My desk, cluttered with computer parts and dual monitors, faced the window overlooking our backyard oak tree. This room represented more than just sleeping space. It was my workshop, my office, and the only place where I could truly be myself. The family saw my time here as withdrawal, as proof of my antisocial tendencies. What they failed to see was that I was building something, since high school computers had been my refuge. I taught myself coding, web development, and system architecture while my peers were partying. During college, I partnered with my best friend Jackson to develop security software for small businesses. We worked remotely, me from my bedroom sanctuary and him from his apartment downtown. Our business grew steadily but modestly for 2 years. Then, 6 months ago, we secured a major client that changed everything. Suddenly, we were expanding, hiring contractors, and seeing profits that surprised even us. But I kept this success private, partly from habit and partly from a strange desire to prove myself before revealing what I had accomplished. At 23, I was making more money than my father, but my family still saw me as directionless. Diane would make pointed comments about real jobs and the importance of building a career. Kimberly once laughed when she saw me working late, asking if I was playing those computer games again. Audrey simply ignored me, except when she needed technical help with her laptop. The previous month, I overheard Diane telling Dad that I was just drifting and needed structure. He defended me weakly, mentioning my computer science degree, but quickly conceded that I could try harder to establish myself. The irony might have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. My quiet, non-confrontational nature stemmed from childhood. Mom had always encouraged thoughtfulness before speaking, a trait Dad once valued, but now seemed to view as weakness. I learned to pick my battles, to observe before acting, to plan rather than react. These qualities served me well in business, but made me appear passive at home. The incident with my student loans illustrated the dynamic perfectly. When the final payment notice arrived, Diane opened it and announced at breakfast that someone needs to grow up and handle his responsibilities. What she didn't know was that I had already set up automatic payments, and the notice was merely confirmation. Rather than explain, I apologized and took the envelope, adding another tally to the growing score of misunderstandings. These small humiliations accumulated over months, building a wall between me and my family that grew taller with each dismissive comment or overlooked achievement. I became accustomed to being underestimated, to being the family disappointment, even as my business flourished in secret. The family dinner that changed everything started normally enough. Dad had closed a major construction contract, and Diane insisted we celebrate together. She prepared her signature roast chicken, and for once, everyone was present at the table simultaneously, a rare occurrence given our different schedules. The tension was palpable from the beginning. Dad attempted cheerful conversation about his new project, while Diane kept steering talk toward Kimberly's internship at a local marketing firm. Audrey complained about her teachers and scrolled through her phone between bites. I sat quietly, answering direct questions politely, but otherwise focusing on my food. "We should discuss summer plans," Diane announced after her second glass of wine. "Kimberly and Audrey both have opportunities we need to accommodate." Dad nodded encouragingly. "What kind of opportunities?" Kimberly straightened importantly. "My internship might extend through August, and they suggested I could use more professional outfits and maybe my own laptop specifically for work." Audrey jumped in immediately. "And I got accepted to that art program in Chicago, remember? It's only 4 weeks, but the supplies list is huge." Dad looked momentarily concerned about the implied expenses, but quickly masked it with enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, girls. We'll make it work." "What about you, Oakley?" he asked, making a visible effort to include me. "Any summer plans?" Before I could answer, Diane scoffed. What would he be planning? More time locked in his room with his computer games. "I actually have some projects I'm working on," I began quietly. Kimberly rolled her eyes. "Those mysterious projects that never seem to go anywhere." "You know," Diane said, setting down her fork deliberately, "we really should discuss the space situation in this house. The girls are doing so much, achieving so much. They need proper space to develop their talents." Dad looked confused. "What space situation? The house has 4 bedrooms. Yes, but Audrey's working with those large canvases now, and the basement lighting is terrible for her art. And Kimberly needs a proper home office for her professional development." Diane's eyes slid toward me coldly. "Meanwhile, some people just waste the space they have." The room fell silent as her implication hung in the air. I continued eating, though the food had lost all taste. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Dad asked cautiously. Diane placed her hand on his arm, her voice dropping to that persuasive tone she used when she wanted something expensive. "He's always been useless," she announced, gesturing toward me. "We should just take his room for the girls." Kimberly immediately brightened. "It would make a perfect creative studio with that northern light. And I could use part of it as a workspace," Audrey added. "We could divide it with one of those stylish partitions." They discussed the renovation of my bedroom as if I weren't sitting right there debating paint colors and furniture arrangements. I looked to my father, waiting for him to object to defend my small corner of the house. "Oakley is still living here," he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Where would he sleep?" "The basement would be fine for him." Diane waved dismissively. "All he needs is space for that computer. It's not like he brings friends over or needs privacy for anything important." I felt something shift inside me at that moment. A lifetime of accommodating others, of making myself smaller to avoid conflict, suddenly seemed like a terrible mistake. But rather than explode with the anger building inside me, I carefully placed my napkin beside my plate, stood up, and quietly left the table. Behind me, I heard my father's weak protest fade under Diane's continued planning. I closed my bedroom door, leaned against it, and for the first time in years, allowed myself to feel the full weight of my resentment. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the room they planned to take from me. The glow-in-the-dark stars my mother had helped me place still formed our own private constellations above my bed. In the darkness, memories flooded back of my father and me in those first years after Mom died. I remembered him teaching me to change the oil in his truck, his patient voice explaining each step. Weekend fishing trips, where conversations flowed easily between comfortable silences. The pride in his eyes when I received my college acceptance letter. When had that man disappeared? When had approval from his new wife become more important than our bond? Around midnight, I heard their bedroom door open and close, followed by footsteps down the hall. I recognized my father's heavy tread, pausing outside my door. For a moment, I thought he might not come in, apologize for dinner. Instead, after a long hesitation, the footsteps continued down the stairs. Unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and checked our company dashboard. New client requests had come in, and our latest security patch was performing well above benchmarks. I sent a message to Jackson about scheduling a meeting with our investors. This secret life of mine, built in the very room they deemed worthless, had become my salvation. Around 2 a.m., voices drifted up from the kitchen. I crept to the top of the stairs to listen. "We could start moving his things this weekend," Diane was saying. "I already found a contractor to install better lighting. Shouldn't we discuss this with him first?" My father's voice sounded uncertain. "Why?" "So he can make excuses about needing to stay." "He's 23, Thomas. Most kids his age are out on their own building real lives. You're not doing him any favors by continuing to coddle him. I just think we should give him some notice. That's all." "Notice for what?" "To continue doing nothing. The girls have actual futures to prepare for." Their voices faded as they moved back upstairs, but the message was clear. In their eyes, I had no future worth considering, no needs worth respecting. The decision had already been made. That night, something crystallized within me. Years of swallowing, hurt of seeking approval from people, determined to withhold it, suddenly seemed like wasted time. The business I had built from this very room had grown beyond my initial expectations. Maybe it was time I did too. As dawn broke, I had made my decision. I would no longer fight for a place at their table. Instead, I would build my own. The next morning, I texted Jackson to meet me for coffee before classes. He arrived at our usual spot, looking concerned by my unusual early morning summons. "You look like you haven't slept," he observed, sliding into the booth across from me. "I need to tell you something I should have done months ago." Over the next hour, I explained my home situation in detail for the first time. Jackson knew the basics, my dad's remarriage and my difficult relationship with my stepfamily, but I had always downplayed the extent of the problem. "Dude, why didn't you say something sooner? You know you could crash at my place any time." I shrugged. "It's my home, too. At least it was." Jackson leaned forward. "So, what are you thinking? Finally, ready to get your own place? Because with what we're making now, you could get something really nice. Actually, I need to check something first. Do you remember that folder of documents my dad had me sign when I turned 21, the liability protection stuff for his business? Jackson nodded. Vaguely. Why I need to find out exactly what I signed. That afternoon, I visited a real estate attorney recommended by one of our business clients. The discovery left me momentarily speechless. 2 years ago, my father had transferred full ownership of our family home to me to protect it from potential liability claims against his construction company. The house I was being slowly erased from was on paper entirely mine. The attorney explained that my father likely intended this as a temporary arrangement until he could establish better business protection, but he had never completed the process of transferring it back. Legally, I could make decisions about the property without anyone else's input or approval. So what are my options, I asked after processing this information. That depends on what you want to achieve, she replied. If you're looking to assert your ownership rights, there are several approaches we could take. I left her office with a clear plan and a strange sense of calm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about finally standing up for myself and establishing boundaries that should have existed all along. Over the next 2 weeks, I methodically put my plan into action. I consulted with financial advisors about mortgage options and tax implications. I quietly moved my most important possessions to a storage unit. I found a modern apartment in the city center, closer to our company's new office space, and signed a lease. All the while, I maintained my usual routine at home. I endured Diane's pointed comments about my room renovation and nodded politely when Audrey showed me paint swatches for her new studio space. I watched my father's conflict play out in his expression, but never quite reach his lips. Jackson worried I was being too calculating, too cold in my approach. Maybe just tell your dad what you found out, he suggested during one of our planning sessions. If he wanted me to know, he would have told me, I replied. This isn't about hurting him. It's about finally taking control of my own life. The final piece fell into place when I received confirmation that all the legal paperwork was in order. I scheduled movers for Saturday morning and spent one last night in my childhood bedroom, saying goodbye to the memories imprinted in its walls. Saturday dawned bright and clear. I woke early, packed my remaining belongings into my car, and waited in the kitchen calmly drinking coffee. Around 9, Diane entered wearing designer loungewear, stopping short when she saw me. "You're up early," she observed suspiciously. "Big day," I replied simply. One by one, the family gathered for breakfast. Kimberly and Audrey discussed their plans to shop for furniture for the studio renovation, while my father silently read the morning news on his tablet. The doorbell rang precisely at 10. "I'll get it," I said, rising from my chair. I returned moments later, followed by 2 men in uniforms. "This is Brad and Anthony." I introduced them to my confused family. "They're here about the house." "What house?" "Our house," Diane demanded, looking to my father. "Thomas, what is this about?" My father looked equally perplexed. "Oakley, what's going on?" I placed a folder on the table and slid it toward him. 2 years ago, you transferred ownership of this house to me as part of your business liability protection plan. You never transferred it back. The kitchen fell silent. Kimberly and Audrey exchanged confused glances while Diane's face drained of color. "That's ridiculous," she finally sputtered. "Thomas, tell him that's ridiculous." My father opened the folder with trembling hands, recognition dawning as he reviewed the documents. "I meant to reverse this after setting up the LLC," he said quietly. "I never thought." "You never thought I'd find out," I suggested. "Or you never thought it would matter, because I would always be the one to give way. This is some kind of joke," Diane insisted, her voice rising. "Some pathetic attempt to get attention." I turned to Brad. "Could you explain who you represent?" The older man stepped forward professionally. "Ma'am, I represent Evergreen Property Management. Mr. Oakley Parker has contracted with us to oversee this property, which county records confirm is solely in his name." Audrey's eyes widened. What does that mean exactly? It means, I said calmly, that the renovation plans have changed. I've decided to rent this property out instead. You cannot be serious. Diane's voice had lost its usual commanding tone. We live here. Not anymore, I replied, maintaining my composure. I'm exercising my legal right as the property owner. You have 48 hours to vacate. Kimberly began to cry, while Audrey looked to her mother in shock. My father stood, his face ashen. Oakley, son, this is our home. Your home, too. Whatever's happened, we can talk about this. We could have talked about it 3 years ago when you married someone who treated me like an unwanted houseguest. We could have talked about it last month when college tuition payments came due and Diane suggested cutting me off. We could have talked about it at dinner when you sat silent while they planned to take my room. I kept my voice steady, meeting his eyes. But we didn't talk, Dad. And now the time for talking has passed. Diane switched tactics instantly, her expression softening as she reached for my arm. Oakley, sweetheart, I know we've had our differences, but we're family. You can't possibly want to throw your father out on the street. Actually, I've arranged for an apartment for Dad if he wants it. I turned to my father. It's your choice, of course. This is outrageous. Diane's facade cracked. You ungrateful little nothing. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done, I raised an eyebrow. Like what exactly making me feel unwelcome in my own home? Erasing every trace of my mother, planning to take the only space I had left. I'll fight this, she threatened, looking wildly around the kitchen. I'll get lawyers involved. You're welcome to try, I replied. But the property records are clear. The house is mine. Thomas, she turned to my father desperately. Do something. My father looked between us, decades of certainty crumbling around him. For the first time, I saw him truly see me, not as his shy, accommodating son, but as a man who had finally found his voice. He's right, Diane, he said quietly. I did sign the house over to him. Legally, it's his decision. Brad will stay to answer any questions about the moving process, I said, picking up my car keys. I've arranged and paid for professional movers to help pack and transport your belongings to temporary storage until you find new accommodations. As I walked toward the door, my father followed me outside. Where will you go? He asked, his voice breaking. I've got a place downtown near the office. Office? What office? I smiled sadly. That's part of what you missed, Dad. While you were building a new family, I was building a business. A successful one. His eyes widened with belated understanding. All those hours in your room weren't wasted after all, I finished for him. I drove away as Diane stormed onto the front lawn, shouting threats and accusations. In my rearview mirror, I watched her collapse onto the curb in angry tears, my father standing helplessly beside her, as Kimberly and Audrey joined their mother in a tableau of shock and dismay. The weight I had carried for years finally lifted as I drove toward my new beginning. My new apartment overlooked the river that wound through downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with natural light, and for the first time in years, I arranged furniture according to my own preferences. No one questioned my choices or suggested alternatives that better suited some arbitrary aesthetic. The first week passed in a strange mixture of relief and guilt. I had stood up for myself, but the image of my father's bewildered face haunted my quieter moments. Finally, I texted him asking to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our new homes. He arrived looking older. Somehow, the confident construction company owner replaced by a man suddenly unsure of his footing. We ordered drinks and found a quiet corner table. The apartment is nice, he said, after an awkward silence. Thank you for arranging it. You're welcome, I replied. Have you found a good attorney? Yet? He nodded. The divorce papers were filed yesterday. At my surprised look, he continued, this situation forced me to see things I've been ignoring for a long time. I'm sorry I said, meaning it. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. I owe you an apology, Oakley. Many apologies, actually. I was so focused on building this new life that I didn't see what it was costing you, costing us. Where's Diane staying? I asked, changing the subject slightly. Her sister's place for now. The girls are there too. He paused. They're pretty angry. I expected that. Can I ask you something? The business you mentioned, is it real? Or was that just to? In answer, I opened my laptop and showed him our company website client list and recent press coverage. His eyes widened as he scrolled through the pages. You did all this from your bedroom while we were treating you like I was useless, I finished. Yes. Tears filled his eyes. I failed you, son. After your mother died, I promised I'd always be in your corner, and somewhere along the way, I completely broke that promise. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge how deeply his betrayal had hurt. Yes, you did. Can we try to fix this? Not the house, I mean. That's yours fair and square. But us? I considered his question carefully. I think so, but it needs to be different. Equal. I'm not that silent kid anymore, Dad. He nodded, wiping his eyes. I see that now. And honestly, I'm proud of the man you've become, even if I had nothing to do with it. We talked for 3 hours that day, really talked for the first time in years. About Mom, about the business, about the painful distance that had grown between us. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it was an honest beginning. 2 months later, our company launched a major new security platform that attracted significant industry attention. Jackson and I found ourselves featured in tech publications and invited to speak at conferences. The success I had hidden for so long was suddenly public knowledge. I hired my father's construction company to renovate our new office space, giving him the largest commercial contract he'd handled that year. It wasn't charity, it was strategic business, his expertise and quality work, exactly what we needed for our growing team. Working together allowed us to rebuild our relationship on new terms, as adults, with mutual respect, rather than as father and disappointed son. He brought his decades of business experience to our planning meetings, and I introduced him to a digital world he had never fully understood before. People who had known me as the quiet kid, who kept to himself, were surprised by this transformation. Former classmates reached out on social media. Old teachers sent congratulatory messages. Distant relatives suddenly discovered our connection. The attention was uncomfortable at first, but I learned to navigate it with the same careful consideration I brought to all aspects of my life. Diane attempted to challenge the house transfer in court, but withdrew the case when her attorney explained the clear paper trail and legal standing. She moved to another city with her daughters, occasionally sending my father demanding texts that grew less frequent over time. The family home that had been the site of so much tension, I eventually sold using part of the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund in my mother's name at the local community college. The rest I invested in expanding our business and securing my future. Looking back, I realized that the years of being underestimated had shaped me in unexpected ways. The habit of observing before acting, of planning methodically, of working quietly toward my goals, these had become strengths rather than weaknesses. What Diane had seen as uselessness had actually been purposeful patience. The small bedroom, where I had retreated from their judgment, had become the launching pad for a life they couldn't have imagined for me. The silence they had mistaken for emptiness had been filled with creation and determination. In the end, I found power not in confrontation, but in quiet resolve, not in forcing others to see my worth, but in finally recognizing it myself. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most? Leave a comment below, sharing how you proved them wrong. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and self-discovery. Remember, sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one with the most to say. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it.